This is Andreas, pop culture guy. Today I have the latest Andreas pop culture retrospective slash week, and it's on the Lois and Clark, the new Adventures of Superman, and of course is the honor of his 30th anniversary, where it premiered in 1993 and ran from until 1997. So
This was a television series that starred Teri Hatcher as Lois Lane, Dean Cain as Superman/Clark Kent. Now, the show was developed by Deborah Joy LeVine, took several liberties with the source material. Some of these changes helped turn Superman the series, into a vehicle for romantic comedy, similar to ABC's Moonlighting, starring Bruce Lewis. I think this was a good idea. It helped differentiate from the other superhero shows. This one's most focused on relationship instead of action. Other changes were progressively attempts to modernize the Man of Steel's mythology and added fascinating new dimensions to it. The show ran from ABC from 1993 to 1997, 4 seasons. This show was heavily inspired by the 1986 John Byrne's reboot of the late 80s reboot of Superman in the comics. Lois and Clark made some changes to help modernize Superman's mythology and added fascinating new dimensions to it for the 90s audience, which is good. Now, I cannot call this Lois and Clark as a trailblazing. I think in the market it was generally thought superheroes as a kid's affair. Lois and Clark took a risk and focused on the relation between Lois Clark and Clark Kent over the superheroics. Well, somewhat superheroics, but later in the series we got more superheroics. But anyway, it's risky marketing act as its name is saying take us seriously, but in execution it wasn't as mature as its promise. Lois and Clark played with the Superman mythology by telling the story from Lois' perspective, or Lois' perspective. But anyway, Lois' romantic traumas drove the plots, especially in the first season where the first showrunner, Deborah Joy LeVine, was trying to focus on more of the relationship instead of the action. Now, while the series also explores science fiction conflicts and Superman's own alienation, they were all in service of Lois' journey, which was always good or sometimes bad.
Clark Kent. And yeah, and this is the 30th anniversary review slash ranking of 13 episodes. So here we go. Now, to start off, start this up for us, 13, Ultra Woman. Now, Ultra Woman is a really great episode where it fails in providing the superhero action of the early seasons, but it triumphantly succeeds in how it develops the complexity and nuance of the characters, giving us a definite conclusion to the will they, won't they aspect of the Lois and Clark romance in the show. Now, in this episode, Lois gets powers, and the story is such a well-known formula that it has long become a trope in superhero books as well, comic books. Now, at some point or another, every superhero's girlfriend has been fasted with their beloved's godlike abilities, in this case, Lois, with Superman's powers. And it usually ends with the status quo being restored, as always. Ultraman is no different, but I even say that this is very exciting and groundbreaking. Could it have been for the entire story arc of the Lois and Clark to revolve around Lois Clark Kent and the Adventures of Ultra Woman? Could be. In 1995, it could have been a ratings poison, but in 2013, I see it as a missed opportunity. But anyway, Ultra Woman is an episode that definitely deals with a rather tired trope and makes it fun, interesting, and even thought-provoking. One of the missteps of Lois Clark is how it only casually references the kind of international super feats that Clark Kent is responsible for. But in this episode, we really get a sense of just how much work Superman really does in the world, even if you told rather than shown, which of course is something I cannot but can't forgive with the limitations of the weekly TV series that this show is. The formula isn't just thrown in for the sake of it. It's presented as a legitimate character canvas for Lois can't truly commit to Clark until she knows him as well as she knows herself. How better to learn the existence of his life than to switch places with Superman? It's done beautifully in this episode. Now, there's some nitpicks I brought up. The major one for me, to be fair, Ultraman is far from perfect, like many of the third season episodes. It suffers from a campy, another long run of campy and lame villains in this series. In this case, the New Witch sisters are charming and inoffensive enough. They remind me a lot, kind of the villains we saw in the other Superman show, The Adventures of Superman, starring George Reed. Now, it's fine. They constantly bigger and demanding the other for their part in um burglaries and or heists. However, the heist was that Superman interfered with. Now, Cherry Lawn is another stunt casting cope for Lois and Clark, and she's really great as the sister that is the main boss. We also have also Mary Gross, who is the tech whiz sister, is really good in this one, and many people will probably recognize her as Miss Quick, the Sophia Teenage Witch. Highly recommend watching Ultra Woman. It's fun. It's a fun filler episode.
Is Phoenix. This one is where Lex Luthor comes back from the dead and sets out to regain his fortune and his former lover, aka Lois Lane. But Superman must stop him. This episode brought back Lex Luthor, played by John C., back to the series, and for the first time, in this particular version, he's bold for one episode. In many ways, it brought back the many things that made Lois and Clark first season great, with the trio awesome chemistry, plus and they indicate some of the great things that could become to the series as season 2 progressed. Now, isn't true, but I think I will say that what brings back season 1 and what makes season 2 interesting is that the show really becomes a superhero show with the Phoenix. I think having Lex Luthor come back really brings back some of the more intricate plot lines that was missing throughout season 2, but also bringing back a comic book villain. The show is notorious not having too many comic book villains. Lex was really the only recurring main comic book villain from the comics being in the show, besides some of the one-offs of season 2 and of course Tempest. I think John C. really does a fantastic job. His performance here is so engaging, invigorating, but also frightening. I think his chemistry with Teri Hatcher was really awesome, and they really showed the vulnerable side of Lex because he truly likes Lois, and I think he tries his best, the character of Lex, to bring Lois to his side. And I think this episode really showcased this, and this is why it's at number 10.
Now, 11. Now, this one is a big one. So for number 11, we got 3 episodes. Well, the 2-part story called The Lex Files. This one is The Faster Than Speeding Phoenix, Shadow of a Doubt, and Voice from the Past. The first part of the 3-part story called The Lex Files. This season 4 3-part is another adventure attempt for Lois and Clark after the 4-part story of the Kryptonian battle between season 3 and the beginning of season 4. This one is my third favorite after me. This is my third favorite season 4 episodes after Meet Joe Doe / Lois and Clark's, and then of course the Twice Night for Mixes. The 3-part story arc with the villain cold at this point Troll or Mr. Smith. We learned his true identity in later episodes, but this story arc is a build-up of some minor continuity. The mention of Lex Luthor, the mention of Ultra Woman and Phoenix first seen in this episode. There's pretty much the same superior speech given from Superman to Phoenix as the way that superior behaves and how they go about their duties of being superior. Unfortunately, we learned that that's not the case for the Phoenix. But going into the second part, we get more effort with the continuity in this show, which is good. And what continuity is the key, especially when it continues on from the previous episode, which is very refreshing from this kind of show. We learn a bit more about Mr. Smith. But also, we learned that he is the boss, not Leslie Luthor. We also learned that there's not only does Leslie like Lois Lane, but so does Mr. Smith. The item that Mr. Smith is searching for is actually a tape recorder, and that the voice underrecorder is none other than Lex Luthor. We have Lex talk about Superman's true identity. Mr. Smith used the Shadow Man, Mr. Harris, to continue to do his dirty work, but offering a antidote in return of his illness that Mr. Smith put on him. Mr. Smith does not agree in the terms of this promise, but this does not go down well with Harrison. So he will go after what Mr. Smith and Leslie want most. But Clark, I'm not saying Leslie takes advantage of Lois, but to Lois' credit, he puts him in this place straight away after this incident. Leslie tries to put Clark and Lois against each other, which was done to a great effect in this episode, in the second part. It was also the plan to drive a wedge between Lois and Clark. This episode also continues to look into if Lois and Clark can have kids, which was fun seeing which resolve between Superman and Dr. Clan. When Superman talks to Dr. about this, it's a really engaging conversation. Now, I like story arcs in the series, but watching through Lois and Clark, sometimes it doesn't see that at all times. I prefer that the arc lasts at least the season uh, through. Example Super 1 and 3 was really good at providing us what it makes a story of. But I think that they started to fade as the series went on. This show glimpses here and there greatness to do story arcs. But there are too many episodes which really made no sense to the season or the series. In between the story arcs, I like how this episode started this new story arc. We are introduced to a new villain, new character, and a new story. And right at the end of the episode, we learn that they all come together, so which is neat. I also like how the series started to deal with Lois and Clark having children, as I mentioned previously. But the next two episodes of the Lex Files, the three-parter titles, improves the first episodes of the three-parter arc. The storyline of the events of this group of episodes. It looks like the writers sat down and planned out what was going to be occurred during these three episodes. Which I like. It not only has continuity occurred between these episodes, but between seasons as well. We continue to explore and learn more about Mr. Smith and Leslie Luckworth and their history, who they are, and what they actually are afterwards. The continuation telling of the story, if Lois and Clark can have children, is an ongoing thread throughout season 4, which will continue until the end of the season 4. We got to see a different side to Clark, especially when he feels that he has been deceived or lied to by Lois. The good news is they both come together at the end of the episode, which also say. Now, the likes of, let's see, Luckbug and Mr. Smith are starting to grow and get better each episode, and the scenes had together are quite good. Patrick Casey has almost more scenes time than anyone, and I feel he does a great job. He plays his role with Mr. Smith with a quick, serious tone, changes his direction. When he's with Lois and Clark, I always enjoy the dynamic between Superman and Dr. Clan in this show as well, and it's no different in these episodes. It's also fun to watch these two in the scene together. Then entering the final part of the third act story, we learn the true identity of Lex's persona in this episode. I like how this played out. Looking back now, all these three episodes we see is coming, but it was a good to come to the conclusion of all time. After a bomb explodes, Superman takes the device which was found and set it up back to the Star Labs to Dr. Clan. Unfortunately, Dr. Clan has other plans, if you know what I mean, but Superman pursues him to take a look anyway, to hopefully discover who armed the bomb and perhaps where it originated from. The episode also continues to look into the Lois Clark dilemma of having kids. Now, I highly recommend seeing this three-part arc in season 4. It's a great conclusion of the story. What we see in this episode, the story arc of Mr. Smith and Lexi was really great villains. I wish they'd step ground in the show continue on. So, and plus we learned a lot about the son of Lex Luthor. I think he had potential to take over Lex as the main villain in the series. I think it wasn't well thought out regarding the age of the character, but nonetheless, he was a good villain. The continuation on it, Lois and Clark having kids, it's also a good discussion in this episode, the third part. And I thought it was great, however, it mentioned that the test results had come back, and we never actually saw this happening. I guess we were assuming this happened between us. Overall, check out the Faster Than Speeding Phoenix, the Shadow Down, and the voice from that. So for my number 10, Barbarians at the Planet, the House of Luther. This two-parter season 1 finale of the Lois and Clark New Adventures of Superman season 1. It's a very fantastic way of wrapping things up in the whole first season. What makes it great, and another great advantage of season 1, was this episode, once again showing John Cena as Luthor himself as being one of the greatest. One of the most fascinating things about this version of the character, as opposed to more of the traditional villainous version of Luthor, like in the Superboy show or the John Byrne or Mark Filton version, which John is based on, is that he truly does seem to be in love with Lois. In his own workplay, outside of his animosity for Superman, His love for her and desire to rush a victorious life of domestic nominality into existence seems to be the product of his ultimate destruction as the uncrowned king of Metropolis. What I really like this episode is the ties of the Luthor, Lois, Clark, and Superman love square triangle nicely. Uh, it's nicely woven in throughout the series, and also the whole entire universe in general. While Luthor's fall from grace is ended but seamless, John Cena's nails it so far that I find myself not caring much about the flaws of this episode. This was always one of my favorite episodes of the series for this reason. Lois really shines in this episode, and her Bergen romantic feelings for Clark prove an excellent foreshadowing for the direction of the second season. The way the episode ends with Lois criticizing Clark for running up just as she was about to talk about her true feelings is an excellent indication of where the second season was headed, as what it became one of the most iconic recurring themes of the second season, or if not the entire series. Overall, I thought these two parters were great finales for season one, but they're not my favorite of my top five. But here it is, number 10, Barbarians at the Plant and the House of Ruth. At number 9, Don't Talk on Superman's Cape. Don't Talk on Superman's Cape is the first really great third season episode of Lois Clark. Third season of Lois Clark is somewhat weak. It's definitely my least favorite of the 4 seasons of Lois Clark. But this episode really is great. There's other season 3 episodes that are really great are in my list. But Don't Talk on Superman's Cape was the episode that got me really like this season. The writing is solid and the charm at the same time. The guest fellas, while minimally campy, are interesting and memorable. There is a refreshing reverence for the comic book lore, and the chemistry between the two leads are at an all-time high. It's still considerably far from the perfect episode, but the warmth and compassionate storytelling in here is really great, and the first time in this bold new season that the showrunners are doing. The idea of Lois knowing Clark's dual identity is capitalized in the way that doesn't seem forced or excessively mindful community value like some of the third season's episodes. Lois and Clark have a genuine human concerns about what their lives together might be and how they might affect the legend of Superman, who is becoming increasingly more of an idea strengthened by the collective energy of Lois and Clark rather than the real identity in his own life. A idea I love, and it's in you see the Curse of Lois Batman for another example of this. One of my favorite scenes in this episode is when Clark brings Lois to Smallville for safekeeping. I wish we could go to Smallville more often in the show, but whatever. It makes more sense than having Jonathan and Muffin fly out to Metropolis all the time. That's why I'm saying. Anyway, Jonathan argues in favor of Lois' independence. I don't talk enough about Eddie Jones. I don't talk enough of the camp parents, particularly Eddie Jones as Jonathan in this series, but he's a fantastic Jonathan Kent, and I wish we see more him and the wife, Martha Kent, in the show more often in Smallville. Anyway, certainly he's quieter, more soft-spoken version of the character than like John Cena's version, John Senior's version of Smallville, who is probably turn in the best overall performance to date. But he really holds his scenes like this. Anyway, to the episode's credit, it's never outright stated as such. But this is the first time Clark brings Lois back to meet his parents now that they're a couple, and she's in the know regarding the secret. The chemistry between the Kents and Lois is pitch perfect. It's one of my favorites in the show. And at fanboy level, I like the scene. It's one of those rare creations where we see Superman with his Sergio-esque hairstyle. Usually it's Clark who has that in the series. But it's a total comment how Clark is the true identity of Lois and Clark show. This episode is the first we see of the new resident mad scientist, Dr. Bernard Clance. Now, Kenneth Cranston actually gets his teeth into the role, and he has one short scene with Superman where he maintains that he's truly desperately sorry for Lois, supposedly. It's enough to take him memorable, and I think that's why he kept going in the next 2 seasons, season 3 and 4. I think it was pity that we couldn't get the comic book mad scientist, Professor Hampton, but Kenneth was more kind of master actor. I see him in a couple of the episodes. So I think it's totally fine. Now, Don't Talk on Superman's Cape is a fantastic uh, episode. It has, of course, Star Trek Next Generation actor Jonathan Frakes being the main villain, and his wife as well is the villain. And I think they're definitely a very better villains in some of the season 3 villains or 4 villains of Lois and Clark. They're definitely memorable, and I like the cast. You can definitely tell that they're having fun and being essentially evil as evil collectors. But that is my number 9. Don't Talk on Superman's Cape.
Number 8, Season's Greetings. This series' first and best Christmas episode, as written by Dean Cain, aka Superman. In a piece of stunt casting, rooting TV's Jeffersons, Toyman, of course, Winslow Scott, of course, played by Sherman Hemsley, with his assistant Miss Duffy, Isabel Sanford as Sissy, creates a toy that emits a spray that makes children and adults greedy, and the adults start acting like greedy children, which makes it even worse. Even Clark is affected by this atomic space rats as Toyman created them, spray using his powers for naughtiness. This episode is truly fun and wonderful Christmas special I've seen in a while. What makes it great is truly being honest to yourself what makes Christmas beings and having a good villain relation for the show's main villain, Toyman. The Lois and Clark relationship also takes a giant leap forward in this episode as the two characters end up spending Christmas night together, holding hands underneath a Christmas tree. Lois may not have Superman that she knows, but her show around Clark is definitely cracking around this point, which is good. I think this is a good Christmas episode, and I highly recommend it.
Now, number 7, Meet John. Well, number 7, Meet John Doe / Lois and Clark. This is season 4's other two-parter in the series. Season 4 is definitely the weakest of the bunch, but I think personally for me, season 4 is a better season over season 3. Everyone's favorite villain of the show, including mine, from the future, Tempest returns to Metropolis. This time, he doesn't want to just destroy Superman. He wants to become the president of the United States. We last saw Tempest in season 3 episode titled Tempest Everyone. Now, it's in my list, but it's definitely a good episode. Now, Tempest used a device called the Sum Eliminator to eliminate a subliminal messages into people's minds, therefore controlling the collective will, and this is done by uplinking it to a satellite relay station, which filters out to every major long-distance phone carrier in the country. Just remember, John Doe is a darn nice guy. Now, the story in general, as a whole, I enjoy it, but only because I'm a big fan of Tempest in this show. What he brings to the series is like how I still continue to want to destroy Superman, as he doesn't want a utopia in the future. What I wasn't a big fan of was the subliminal messages that he was using. But I thought it could have been done better than John Doe is a darn nice guy. But then again, I felt the actors struggled to play on these words, and others that were saying throughout the episode just was kind of off. But anyway, one thing that did confuse me, and I'll get into positives, is when we first see Tempest, he's at Metropolis home for the criminal assailant. We have no idea how he got there, but after his previous episode, all we know is that Tempest is taken care of, but no idea what it actually means. The episode again explores time travel in the case of using time windows, which was something different from the previous episode involving Tempest. The one part of this episode that I thought was well thought out was once John Doe won the election, it was straight into action in grounding Superman. In one scene, Superman stops a robbery and hands the two robots over to the proper authorities. What plays on from there is absolutely genius. Now, Tempest is a character that I really like the show, and I will explain that more in some of the Tempest episodes in my list. What I like about it is because of Lane Davis plays the character so well. I like how he tries to let the audience know all the jokes revolving Superman and his secret identity. I mean, he knows how to play the serious and not so serious aspects of his character so well. I believe he brings a lot to this episode and the series in general. There's not much to say about the other guest actors in this episode. They played their part, and some better than others, as usual in the series. I really enjoyed the scene at the start of the episode at Metropolis, home for the criminal assailant, where we see Tempest being interviewed by who I felt was a doctor, but we find out to be one of the fellow inmates. Well done, insert copy of the hands here. The special effects was special effects in this episode of John Doe slash the Lois and Clark's two-parter. The special effects used in this episode were very good for its time. I like how they did it. I like how they did the time windows. Reminding me of the Doom Tune and the apocalypse of the Superman animated series versions and the Justice League TV shows. This episode continues on from the previous episode titled Meet John Doe, where Superman was tricked and trapped in a portal time, where President-elect Doe is still using his sub-emulator to implant the summoning messages to people by way of the phone. If people did not have a phone, that could be a shock. But eventually, the President John Doe, aka Tempest, find a way to use the summoning not only using phones but electricity system as well. This is how H.G. Wells returned to find out what was happening in the future, not to be the utopia it was. He brings to this Earth Superman from the parallel universe from season 3's Tempest Anyone. Lois, with the help of the parallel universe Superman and Mr. Olsen, work together to track down Tempest and stop it. I enjoyed how this series has brought not one but two H.G. Wells, considering the main travels in time. You'll never really know which one we'll see. In this episode, we get an older version, and he brings to this Earth Superman from the parallel universe of season 3, Tempest Anyone. You see immediately the chemistry between him and Lois after what happened when she went into his world, and literally turning it upside down for the better. I must add, Martha and John didn't meet this version of Clark for the first time, not knowing if any of this is real or even makes sense. Now, as always, Len Davis is great as Tempest. I have to say previously or in the next couple of reviews that in this top ranking of Lois and Clark. And I like Countess Camp as H.G. Wells as well. I like how they both bring the series, and I like too how Len Davis asked for both versions of the H.G. Wells. I know how they're going to go for with the Rick Dillon who plays Dragon. I think he tried hard, but the script was not written over well for his character himself. Anyway, besides that, I think Teri Hatcher, aka Lois Lane, is the standout in this episode, the second part. She brings a lot to the table and does a really good job. The special effects in this episode, the second part, were also good too. Definitely better than the first part. And I say Tuesday, I like the scenes where H.G. Wells and Lois are in the time scene, are spinning through time to find Superman. I thought it was really well done. This series 4 two-parter of Tempest was really great. I wish we had more Tempest in the comics, or in general, in any media. But I think these two-parter shows that Tempest was really a great villain, and he definitely was a great foe for Superman in this series since season 2.
Okay. At number 6, Wall of Sound. The city of Metropolis is in peril as a new criminal uses sound waves to render old citizens helplessly. Including Superman. I'm forced to give this episode a high remark because I think this is the one I really truly got into the show properly because it's so much fun. There's scaffolds of superhero action and also camp that is not overly goofy or awkward in the series that could plunge into midway through second season or really for me in third season. This episode proves that the show can really work as an action series as long as the action was toned down from time to time in favor of low-key relationship development, just like in first season. This was one of the first examples of a Superman filler, where it was another filler episode with no relation to the overall season's arc that was going on in season 2. But there was more of an emphasis on superheroics and crime fighting than Lois and Clark dealt in first season. And I'm fine with that because that's what I'm here for. The show's troublesome dealings with possible conversation might that it had to play around with the different types of genres they had to put to intrigue the audience that were aiming for in the TV syndicate. The main thing I like about this episode is the main villain, Lenny Stock, aka the Soundman. The idea of Superman fighting an English rock star who uses high-frequency sound as a main weapon could have been more 90s, but I like this. The scene where Superman faces down the Soundman and his gang dressed in leather jackets and motorcycle helmets is just about to rob a jewelry store is iconic in my mind. Now, the actor that plays it has such a good, distinct voice that is laughable, but I think he really nails the menacing and somewhat stupid villain persona. Now, outside of the camp and disaster appeal of this episode for everyone, I think the sound is a critical weakness for Superman because some might argue that his superhuman should prevent him from being more acceptable, but picking your own super science is a shame they never brought Lenny stuck back for a team-up episode with another original villain of the series like Tempest. He was essentially more entertaining than some of the villains or original villains that the show produced from the third and fourth season. I think he could have been a great asset to the Superman Rose Gallery in the comics too. I think having a villain using sound is a neat gimmick, and I think one that should be in the Superman Rose Gallery. Now, in terms of what makes this episode good, it was also the subplot with Clark winning the Jerusalem Award for the kind of story Lois typically ignore was nice. I think this was a good development, and the show has done a great job better with the Lois and Clark thematic this time around in season 2. But it gave Lois a good reason to rethink her importance of line work she was doing, and as well thinking Clark as an adversary as well as his partner in the show. As the show moved to the characters closer to romance, I think the idea of Lois and Clark being potential rivals could have been a non-issue for me, but I think it was a bit unrealistic for the show to continue on after season 2. But I think it'll be interesting to have these two compete while dating each other during season 2, which they haven't done that. But in this case, I think number 6 is a good spot for Wall of Silence.
At number 5, The Prankster. This episode was delightful for a number of reasons for me. It's definitely the episode that got me to really like the show of Lois and Clark. I think one of the things that's great about it is his main antagonist, Prankster, aka Kyle Griffin. Like Lois' description in this episode, it's a little bit tricky. It's a little bit silly at the start, but it gets a lot better. The writing is sharper than the source, another episode previously from this episode in season 2. The plot is more interesting, even as it's small with a lot of same old cliches in TV fashion. The episode really succeeds by developing an atmosphere of a mad cat comedy in a way that the series eventually tried to do in every other episode, which always failing miserably throughout the series, which I think is horrible. But anyway, the best of all is Bronson Pinckney as Kyle Griffin, aka the Prankster. Pinckney is a better actor than a lot of the previous guest stars of the show, and he injects real threat and menace into the character of the prankster, and into the character that's mostly played for laughs. In many ways, it's a pity that Griffin didn't become a recurring villain in the show. Bronson, the actor that plays the prankster, only made one more appearance as the character in season 2. His presence could have greatly straightened other less effective episodes that could have given the writers on it excuse to think up more inventive pranks for him to use. On the Superboy show, there's an episode featuring Lex Luthor, who was more in line with the Silver Bronze Age incarnation of the character as a recurring villain as opposed to an oral villain like the first of Lois and Clark. We're mostly great made up for many dire episodes of the series as a whole. It's a pity that Lois and Clark didn't have more recurring villains like this. But anyway, I think what makes this episode really great for me was the examination of Boston romance between Lois and Clark. This episode is mostly filler, but it's still really great, excellent scenes. Nonetheless, the scene where Lois and Clark visit the Rendell Loomis, what's wrong with the name Oswald, is just priceless for better or worse. Clark's show of stopping thumbs up to Loomis at the end of the scene was actually used as a Superman homepage. Okay. Now, anyway, essentially, Loomis' bombshell wife was far too thin and clad for it to make any sense that she opened the door for true reporters, but hilarity of the like made up for that left in logic. The other really great Lois and Clark scene was obviously when Panic Lois arrives at Clark's spiral with pizza and the lethal weapon at the point of the trilogy. What I liked about this was how Clark was almost instantly able to make Lois feel comfortable, safe to the point where she falls asleep on his shoulder, only a few minutes after the writing. It's also hilarious to read on board Clark talked about how sometimes he feels he needs to be more of a wild man, like Mel Gibson, which I like that comment because it's obviously a Superman exception here is that Richard Donner directed all of the Lethal Weapon movies. Maybe the writers knew that, maybe it didn't. It's still cool. Overall, I think The Prankster was another great villain-centric episode of the Lois Clark show. And you see, so far in my list, I usually pick the villain section episodes because I think they were the best overall in the show. And I think there should have been more attempts to do that more. Okay, now our next episode, episode 4, Never on Sunday. Now, this is another season 3 episode that I really like. Another solid episode, which, while not remarkable in some of the Lois Clark episodes, it's a perfectly serviceable episode that not only provides an intriguing plot and a formidable villain for once in the show for me, anyway, but also previously unseen insight into Clark's past as struggling globe traveling reporter previously before the dating plan. Now, Chris Williams Byron's Sunday is the first original Lois Clark villain that I've been very impressed by a lot of time. He's fearsome, and an timid presence, and his powers and abilities to boot, not merely another corrupt white-collar criminal. Besides that, is fantastic and definitely refreshing. And plus, having a magical villain is also refreshing as well. Another thing that makes it really work is that what I like about it is it's scary. I like how it's almost like a horror episode of a Lois and Clark. It's definitely a X-File type episode, which I really like. And of course, it's a guilty pleasure of mine, which is really great. Now, Sunday's sneaky escape at the end of the episode tease and turn for character, which sadly never came to be, which I am definitely sad because I think this character could have been another character just like Frankster and the Sound Man, of being another recurring villain in this series. But whatever. Placing a villain's framework within Clark's history as a struggling reporter is a really great idea. Wish that we took more in the series with Clark than Lois. But anyway, I think it's too often we get villains out of the branch on the established reporter Lois Lane or Superman, the world's greatest hero. But it was refreshing to get a villain whose bandana is clearly focused on Clark, with Lois providing the support usually issued by Clark. Overall, I highly recommend to watch this episode, Never on Sunday, and that's why it's at number 4.
At number 3, Tempest Fugitive. On to season 2 now, and in Tempest Fugitive, a criminal from the future steals a time machine created by the famed author H.G. Wells, and it journeys back to the past in the attempt to kill Superman. Along the way, he kidnaps Lois Lane and reveals Clark's secretary, and nearly bonds up baby Soups. Now, that's super bonkers, but hey, Tempest Fugitive is a brilliant episode, and I think this is one of the best episodes in the Lois and Clark series. This is truly a comic book episode, and I think Tempest, played by Len Davis, is truly one of the great villains that this show created, and I think one that should be in the comics officially. With great dialogue and some killer moments, I think this is the best of all. It introduced one of Lois and Clark's greatest villains, the diabolical Tempest. Lane Davis's performance as Tempest is great, somewhat evoking the memories of my favorite show of sci-fi, Doctor Who's main arch enemy, the Master, and the show could bring him back several times over the course of the 2 seasons, which makes sense. He really has that comic book villain persona. He has a good gimmick. He's from a future, and his motivation and why he hates Superman is realistic and makes sense. And I think this is why he truly stands out compared to all villains from this show.
Now, to my number 2, Twice the Night Before Mixmas. Twice the Night Before Mixmas is one of the truest Superman stories in the Lois and Clark series. It's a classic Superman story that I feel like it's been written by an actual comic book writer, like Mark Miller or Mark Wade or Mark Wolfman or John Byrne or something like that. It serves one of the further evidence that while season 4 may be the weakest season of Lois and Clark, it is Dean Cain's strongest performance as the actor as Superman. The scene where Mixley offers Clark the choice to leave Earth and to restore normal time sees Cain deliver the line, "I'm not going anywhere. There's always a little bit of hope left in human spirit, and I'll find it." It made the hairs on my neck stand up tremendously. This is not uncertainty, unsure fanboy Clark from season 1. This is the mighty champion, the true Superman of season 4, who has come to terms with his heritage, his humanity, and his purpose in life, and has relentless, impenetrable courage of the character from the comics and the Christopher films as well. Crucially, I think Clark doing this whole speech is really great. and Lois wakens from her mixedly, I say, uh, mysterious slumber and becomes aware of the time loop. By coincidence or design, this is a beautiful symmetry. In the early episode, it was Lois' unwavering belief in the idea of Superman that transformed Clark from the struggling, neurotic vigilante into the champion of justice. Now, Clark truly has become the idea, and he's able to turn the favor. He speaks volumes not only about the character of Superman, but the appearance of Lois Lane, not only as his love interest, but as the catalyst for the formula of the Man of Steel. Well, I may not always care for Smallville or the cinematic efforts Zack Snyder, I will admit that they understood the symbolic importance of Lois and Clark as well, and it's just never quite executed as well as Lois and Clark, the new Adventures of Superman. But what I like this episode the most, and why he's number 2, is the villain. Howie Mandel really surprised me in his turn as Mr. Mr. Mixie Picklick, if I had to say it right. I often, this character is definitely such a cue from Star Trek Next Generation, and that if it used it correctly, it can be a stunning villain for Superman to face. After all, Superman's archenemy is a bold industrialist with no superpowers. And of course, an extra-dimensional creature could represent a greater threat to Clark than a naively Bill Gates yuppie Luther wannabes in the show. But as a Superman fan, I think this was superb. I think Howie Mandel was a great actor, and he really brings the German menace and German fun of the role of Mixie. Truly spectacular. Mixie is a tricky character to realize in live action setting. For me, I have no desire to see a short, slightly born man in a purple suit, maybe. I think that could work, but in a very CGI form. But I think for me, many times as fans, we complain that he hasn't been done properly in this or that live action incarnation. I'm looking at you, Smallville. But what this works, I think, is probably the most sensible version of him I've seen is the clad in Shakespearean costume drama crab. I think that really works in this show, and I think it really works. But very much the playful in comics. Rendell is a strong in the role that I wish the showrunners had seen fit to have him as a recurring villain. He's a great villain, just like the prankster, the sound man, and Baron Sunday. I think he could have been a great recurring villain if the series got renewed. Because come on, after John Cena Lex died in season 3, it became very struggling. Besides Tempest being the major one. Whereas a supernatural villain is generally realistic, supernatural felt too much like a sharp jump in the 1990s. Not really for the show. I think the show wasn't too much grounded like Nolan films later in the 2000s. But anyway, I think Twice the Night Before Christmas is a great Lois and Clark episode, and that's why it's at my number 2. Like, it's not number 1, because I think number 1 is truly the best of the Lois and Clark series. And finally, into number 1 is Tempest. Anyone? With the return of the series' best original villain comes the return of the honest-to-God magic that makes the series a very best Superman series, is Tempest, the major villain from Tempest Fugitive. From my number 3. Tempest Anyone is the episode that is my number 1 favorite of the Lois Clark. It's not simply the return of Van Theory villain to wreak more three-act havoc. It raises some really important questions in the context of these characters and their importance to each other. What could happen if Lois Lane entered a role without Superman? By answering that, she could create a version of Superman using the exact same ideals represented by the Man of Steel she knows and loves. It once again graduates her from the mere love interest to his heroic equal, which is awesome. In the season 1 episode in Strange Visitor from Another Planet, she indirectly convinced her Clark to continue being Superman, not necessarily because of the good deeds he did and the people has to be saved, but rather because of the symbol he represents. Here, she goes and steps forward and creating the symbol to help Clark free himself from his inhibitions also. It cements Lois' performance in the show and the Superman legacy for me. And she's just as much a reason for the creation of Man of Steel as the Cants or even Jor-El, that matter. But what really works for this episode, and just to wrap things up for my number 1, is because of the villain's actor, Len Davis. Is just the best. Once again, he absolutely chooses the scenery. I'm the bad guy. I always have a plan. Or if I wanted to kill her, I'll beat her to death with a frozen lamb chop and eat it with a nice mullet. With villain that not only challenges Superman and his belief structure, but also the very framework of fictional TV show, he breaks the third rule of a handful of times, most notably with his internally silly line about commercial breaks, and states that the part of the reason he brought Lois into the alternate dimension is just to torture her. It's because it makes good for TV. Of course, there are holes in this episode, but why bother? It's one of the best. I think I really enjoyed this. Being one, how did Tempest escape from his wild prison in the 1800s? We'll never know. But then again, Davis is so absolutely charming, and the story is wonderfully invented and created that you don't find yourself caring about these unexplained details in this episode. Overall, I think Tempest and the One is my number one favorite of the Lois and Clark New Adventures of Superman.